Psychoanalytic and Psychosexual Theory by Sigmund Freud. It explains human behaviors in terms of the interaction of various components of personality. Here are the two components parts of the mind, the ego and superego. The ego is to develop Freud id during infancy. The ego's goal is to satisfy the humans of the id in a safe, socially acceptable way. The ego follows the reality principle as it operates in both the conscious and unconscious mind. The superego is to develop during early childhood and is responsible for ensuring moral standards are followed. The superego operates on the morality principle and motivates us to have in a socially responsible and acceptable manner. And psychosexual theory. The psychosexual energy or libido was described as the driving force behind behavior during the 5 psychosexual stages, which are the oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital stages. Cognitive theory. Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development suggests that children move through 4 different stages of mental development. Here are 4 different stages. The sensory motor stage aged 2 years. The children learn about world through basic actions such as sucking, grasping, looking, and listening. The second stage, the pre-operational stage, aged 2 to 2 years. This stage, children begin to think symbolically and learn to use words and pictures to represent objects. The concrete operational stage is age 7 to 11. During this stage, children begin to thinking logically and about concrete event. The fourth stage, the formal operational stages, age 12 and up. At this stage, the adolescent or young adult begins to think abstractly and reason about hypothetical problems. Psychosocial theory of development. The Erikson theory of psychosocial development is to maintain that personality develops in a predetermined order through 8 stages of psychosocial development from infancy to adulthood. Here are the 8 stages of psychosocial development. First stage, stage 1, stress versus mistrust. The first stage of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development occurs between birth, 1 year of age, and is the most fundamental stage in life. If a child successfully develops trust, the child will feel safe and secure in the world. If a child fails to develop trust, will result in fear. This will lead to mistrust. Stage number 2. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. The second stage, it takes place during early childhood. It is focused on children developing a greater sense of personal control at this point. They are starting to perform basic actions on their own and making simple decisions about that. Why they prepare success during this stage of psychosocial development lead to a feeling of autonomy, failure results in feelings of shame and doubt. Stage number 3. Initiative versus guilt. The third stage, the children who are successful at this stage feel capable and able to lead others. Those who fail to acquire these skills are left with a sense of guilt, self-doubt, and lack of initiative. Stage number 4, industry versus inferiority. Children who encouraged and recommended by parents and teachers develop a feeling of competence and belief in their skills. Stage number 5. Identity versus confusion. This stage plays an essential role in developing a sense of personal identity, which will continue to influence behavior and development for the rest of a person's life. Stage number 6. Intimacy versus isolation. This stage covers the period of early adulthood when people are exploring personal relationships. Stage number 7. Generativity versus stagnation. This stage, we continue to build our lives focusing on our career and family. Those who are successful during this phase will feel that they are contributing to the world by being active in their home and community. Stage number 8. Integrity versus despair. The final psychosocial stage occurs during old age is focused on reflecting back of life. Those who are confused and successful during this stage will feel that their life has been wasted and many experience many regrets. The person will be left with feelings of bitterness and despair. Those who feel proud of their accomplishments will feel a sense of integrity. Successfully completing this phase means looking back with a few regrets and a general feeling of satisfaction. Sociocultural theory. Vygotsky's sociocultural theory of human learning describes learning as a social process and the origination of human intelligence. In society or culture, the major theme of Vygotsky's theoretical framework is that social interaction plays a fundamental role in the development. Cognition. Vygotsky believed that everything is learned on two levels. First, through interaction with others, and then integrated into the individual's mental structure. A second aspect of Vygotsky's theory is the idea that the potential for cognitive development is limited to a zone of proximal development (GPD). This zone is the area of exploration for which the student is cognitively prepared but requires help and social interaction to fully develop.
Theory was developed by the Yuri Bernal. It offers a framework through which community physiologists examine individual relationships within communities and the wider society. The theory is also commonly referred to as ecological system framework. For example, to be found in the way of the physical environment in which people live and interact. Social create the conditions. 2. Classical conditioning is a type of learning that happens unconsciously. When you learn through classical conditioning on automatic condition, the span is fed with a specific stimulus. This is behavior where all expose the classical conditioning in one way. And number 3, operant condition. Operant conditioning can also be used to disguise a behavior via the removal of the desirable outcome or the application of negative outcomes. Through operant conditioning, an individual make an association between a particular behavior and a consequence.
Multiple intelligence theory. The multiple intelligence theory can draw students back into learning. Using the different intelligence to teach a concept allows each of your diverse learners a chance to succeed at learning. The learner with strength in the visual spatial intelligence will do well with drawing and puzzles. Metacognitive theory is thinking about thinking. It is an increasingly useful mechanism to enhance student learning, both for immediate outcomes and for helping students to understand their own learning processes. Laws of learning. Many educational psychologists have acknowledged the utility of Thorndike's law of learning, which enable teachers to teach their learners more efficiently. In other words, by following these principles, people acquire empowering additional insights into what makes them learn most effectively. These laws are readiness, exercise, effect, recency, primary, and intensity.
Before we proceed to the example of psychoanalytic and psychosexual theory, I just want to give some short description from this. The psychosexual energy or libido was described as the driving force behind behavior, and psychoanalytic theory suggested that personality is mostly established by the age of 5. Experience play a large role in the personality development and continue to influence behavior, and psychoanalytic theory suggested that personality is mostly established by the age of 5. Experiences play a large role in the personality development and continue to influence behavior later in life. And for example of psychoanalytic theory, Freud believed that events in our childhood have a great influence on our adult lives, shaping our personality. For example, anxiety originating from traumatic experiences in a person's past is hidden from conscious and may cause problem during this adulthood. And for the next is example of psychosexual theory. For example, if you experience rejection as a child, you might bury those negative feelings in your unconscious so you don't have to deal with them. The memories could be based on experiences from the first 2 years in our life. Throughout his work with adults, Freud created the stage of psychosexual developments. And for the next, example of cognitive theory. According to cognitive learning theory, certain thinking process can lead to more knowledge retention. Cognitive learning can help you achieve mastery in your career by highlighting the best ways you learn in this article, where define cognitive learning and explain how you can use it to improve performance at work and other aspects in your life. But you feel unhappy, you don't want to move, but your partner is so excited about the promotion and you want them to be happy life. Little by little, you begin to consider the cost of living in a small town. You even read some articles on small town.
Part of Psychosocial Development by Erik Erikson, Trust versus Mistrust. Example of trust. At these stages, the infant feels mostly a sense of responsive caregiver and their safety. So the infant are developing their trust because they know they are safety. Example, the mother, the yaya, and the relatives. Example of mistrust. If infant treated cruelty like grow up with sense of mistrust for people in the world, the children when grow up, he and she lack of trusting for himself and herself to another person, because the feeling of anxiety, fear, it will lead into mistrust. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. Example of autonomy. The child has a freedom to choose like the clothes she and he wants to, toys, foods, as well as freedom of practicing wearing clothes, playing toys, to explore true reality of his own world. Example of shame and doubt, lacking of appreciation, tendency of low self-esteem, thinking that she and he will not belong in that environment that will lead into doubts and shame. Initiative versus guilt. Example of initiative. In initiative stages, the child who will be the leader or member having a task, or even individual, he can have an idea on what he does on a certain task. Example, role playing, dancing, singing, etc. Example of guilt. If the children or pupils experience embarrassing in their life, it will lead them into a guilt or feeling for being nuisance. Example, criticisms, bullying. Industry versus inferiority. Example of industry. The child able to read and write, to do sums, to do things on their own. Example of inferiority. If the child or pupil is distracted by parents or teachers, child begins to feel inferior, doubting his own abilities. Identity versus rule confusion. Example of identity, exploration of personal values, beliefs, and goals. The individuals wants to belong to society and fit in. Example of role confusion involves the individual not being some about themselves, on their place in society. Intimacy versus isolation. Example of intimacy, major of conflict center on performing intimate loving relationship with other people. Example of isolation, pairing, commitment, and relationships can lead to isolation, loneliness, sometimes depression. Generativity versus stagnation. Example of generativity, being productive at work, becoming involved in community activities and organization. Example of stagnation, feeling unproductive, disconnected, or uninvolved with their community and with society as a whole. Ego integrity versus despair. Example of ego integrity, acceptance of one's and one and only life cycle, reflecting the past life. Example of despair, often leading to depression and hopelessness. Socio-cultural theory of development, something that involves the social and cultural aspects. Example, one culture teaches children to play with toys, while other encourages them to play outdoors. Children from both cultures adapt to what their cultures teach them.
Cognition is the ability to examine how you process through and feeling. This ability encourages students to understand how they learn best. It also helps them to develop self-awareness skills that become important as they get older.
Go. Examples of ecological theory. According to Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, if a child's parents are actively involved in the friendships of their child, for example, they invite their child's friends over to their house from time to time and spend time with them, it would be the relationship between a child's home life and a child's relationship with their friends. Examples of classical conditioning. Whenever you come home wearing a baseball cap, you take your child to the park to play. So, whenever your child sees you come home with a baseball cap, he is excited because he has associated your baseball cap with a trip to the park. This learning by association is classical conditioning.